I somewhat remembered. Okay, my mic is on. I apologize. Everything is cobbled together. Uh, yeah, but we're gonna make it work. This is kind of a one-off um, because my present living situation doesn't allow me the opportunity to stream, but it's my birthday, so I wanted to stream some ghost stories because I've been looking forward to that since I started this. And October. So, what is going on? Something's wrong with my stream. Hang on. Oh no. It's just been a trip. It's been so long since I did this. I've forgotten how to do everything, and my setup isn't the way it's supposed to be. But it's going to work. We're going to get it. Come on, work. No. It says everything's working. Okay, here we are. Okay, here we go. So, today we are reading a ghost story by, all right, it is "Oh Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Lad" by British writer M.R. James, in which a man digs up a bronze whistle in a possible Templar preceptory. Included in his collection Ghost Stories of an Antiquary, 1904, and is named after the poem by Robert Burns. I was going to read the poem. What is going on with my stream? Ah, what are you doing? I almost want to say it might just be my monitoring. I hope. Why is it blurry? Oh, good Lord. I apologize. Everything's blurry. But I don't think it's going to let me do anything. Everything used to be good. I mean, as long as the audio's okay, it should be all right, right? We're just going to go because I don't have a whole lot of time and I want to do this. I was looking forward to it. So we're just going to go. So, "Oh Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Lad." Yes, I was going to read the poem, but it's got an accent with it that I figured I wasn't going to do justice to. So we'll just read. We'll just read the story. And there's a certain reason why I decided to pick this one. And I'll explain it immediately because I just started reading it a little bit. And yes. And now I need to put the, I do. I apologize. I haven't done this in a long time and everything is wrong. There. Okay. "Oh Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Lad" by M.R. James. "I suppose you will be getting away pretty soon now. Full term is over, Professor," said a person not in the story to the professor of ontology, soon after they had sat down next to each other at a feast in the hospitable hall of St. James's Cottage, St. James's College. The reason why I picked it, because I love "said a person not in the story." It amused me at the time. It didn't come across as very amusing, probably, but it did. It was amusing to me. The idea of it, the meta. Anyway, I shall start again. "I suppose you'll be getting away pretty soon now. Full term is over, Professor," said a person not in the story to the professor of ontology, soon after they had sat down next to each other at a feast in the hospitable hall of St. James's College. The professor was young, neat, and precise in speech. "Yes," he said, "my friends have been making me take up golf this term, and I mean to go to the East Coast. In point of fact, to Burnstow, I dare say you know it, for a week or 10 days to improve my game. I hope to get off tomorrow." Oh, Parkins," said his neighbor on the other side, "if you are going to Burnstow, I wish you would look at the site of the Templars' preceptory, and let me know if you think it would be any good to have a dig there in the summer." It was, as you might suppose, a person of antiquarian pursuits who said this, but since he, sorry, apparently this wasn't a very good text to choose to show this. Everything's going wrong. Oh well, I didn't transition. Gosh, I'm so sorry. There we go. I'll try again. Okay. I hope everything's going right on that end. If not, I mean, things happen. This was kind of a spontaneous thing, and that's all wrong. There. And we're just going to keep going because there. Okay. Oh, whistle, and I'll come to you, my lad, by M.R. James. I suppose you will be getting away pretty soon now. Full term is over, Professor, said a person not in the story to the professor of ontology, soon after they had sat down next to each other at a feast in the hospitable hall of St. James's College. The professor was young, neat, and precise in speech. Sounds very Indiana Jones. Yes, he said, my friends have been making me take up golf this term, and I mean to go to the East Coast. In point of fact, to Burnstow, I dare say you know it, for a week or 10 days to improve my game. I hope to get off tomorrow. Oh, Parkins, said his neighbor on the other side, if you are going to Burnstow, I wish you would look at the site of the Templars' preceptory, and let me know if you think it would be any good to have a dig there in the summer. It was, as you might suppose, a person of antiquarian pursuits who said this, but since he merely appears in this prologue, there is no need to give his entitlements. Certainly, said Parkins the professor. If you will describe to me whereabouts the site is, I will do my best to give you an idea of the lie of the land when I get back, or I could write to you about it, if you would tell me where you are likely to be. Don't trouble to do that, thanks. It's only that I'm thinking of taking my family in that direction in the long, and it occurred to me that as very few of the English preceptories have ever been properly planned, I might have an opportunity of doing something useful on off days. The professor rather sniffed at the idea that planning out a preceptory could be described as useful. His neighbor continued, the site, I doubt if there is anything showing above ground, must be down quite close to the beach now. The sea has encroached tremendously, as you know, all along that bit of coast. I should think, from the map, that it must be about 3/4 of a mile from the Globe Inn, at the north end of the town. Where are you going to stay? Well, at the Globe Inn, as a matter of fact, said Parkins. I have engaged a room there. I couldn't get in anywhere else. Most of the lodging houses are shut up in winter, it seems, and as it is, they tell me that the only room of any size I can have is really a double bed one, and that they haven't a corner in which to store the other bed, and so on. But I must have a fairly large room, for I am taking some books down, and mean to do a bit of work. And though I don't quite fancy having an empty bed, not to speak of two, in what I may call for the time being my study, I suppose I can manage to rough it for the short time I shall be there. This is going to be an adventure if it's going to have so many errors in it. I apologize. Do you call having an extra bed in your room roughing it, Parkins? Said a bluff person opposite. Look here, I shall come down and occupy it for a bit. It'll be company for you. The professor quivered, but managed to laugh in a courteous manner. By all means, Rogers, there's nothing I should like better, but I'm afraid you would find it rather dull, and you don't play golf, do you? No, thank heaven, said rude Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers is never rude. Well, you see, when I'm not writing, I shall most likely be out on the links, and that, as I say, would be rather dull for you, I'm afraid. Oh, I don't know. There's certain to be somebody I know in the place. But, of course, if you don't want me, speak the word, Parkins. I shan't be offended. Truth, as you always tell us, is never offensive. Parkins was indeed scrupulously polite and strictly truthful. It is to be feared that Mr. Rogers sometimes practiced upon his knowledge of these characteristics. In Parkins' breast there was a conflict now raging, which for a moment or two did not allow him to answer. Relatable. That interval being over, he said, well, if you want the exact truth, Rogers, I was considering whether the room I speak of would really be large enough to accommodate us both comfortably, and also whether, mind, I shouldn't have said this if you hadn't pressed me, you would not constitute something in the nature of a hindrance to my work. Rogers laughed loudly. Well done, Parkins, he said. It's all right. I promise not to interrupt your work. Don't you disturb yourself about that. I won't come if you don't want me, but I think I should do so nicely to keep the ghosts off. Here he might have been seen to wink and to nudge his next neighbor. Parkins might also have been seen to become pink. I beg pardon, Parkins, Rogers continued. I oughtn't to have said that. I forget you didn't like levity on these topics. Well, Parkins said, as you have mentioned the matter, I freely own that I do not like careless talk about what you call ghosts. A man in my position, he went on, raising his voice a little, cannot, I find, be too careful about appearing to sanction the current beliefs on such subjects. As you know, Rogers, or as you ought to know, for I think I have never concealed my views. No, you certainly have not, old man, put in Rogers sotto voce. Not quite sure what it means, so we shall try to translate. Ah! Oh, no, whoops. Well, that's nice. Ah! Sorry. Everything is wrong. Da-da-da-dun, da-da-dun. Italian. Oh, whisper. Sotto. Soft voice, maybe? I don't know. Put in Rogers sotto voce. No, you certainly have not, old man. Put in Rogers sotto voce. I hold that any semblance, any appearance of concession to the view that such thing might exist, is equivalent to a renunciation of all that I hold most sacred, but I'm afraid I have not succeeded in securing your attention. Your undivided attention was what Dr. Blimber actually said, Rogers interrupted, with every appearance of an earnest desire for accuracy. But I beg your pardon, Parkins, I'm stopping you. No, not at all, said Parkins. I don't remember Blimber. Perhaps he was before my time, but I needn't go on. I'm sure you know what I mean. Yes, yes, said Rogers rather hastily. Just so. We'll go into it fully at Bernstow or somewhere. In repeating the above dialogue, I have tried to give the impression which it made on me that Parkins was something of an old woman, rather hen-like, perhaps, in his little ways. Do you understand that, chicken? Rather hen-like, perhaps, in his little ways, totally destitute, alas, of the sense of humor, but at the same time dauntless and sincere in his convictions, and a man deserving of the greatest respect. Whether or not the reader has gathered so much, that was the character which Parkins had. Good to know. All right, here we go, getting into the story. Ah, hang on, I have to adjust my monitoring screen. I hope it doesn't mess everything up. Ah! I'm excited so far. I mean, of course, it wasn't ghost-like right away at the beginning, but we're getting there. And I like temple stuff and ghost stuff, and both of them put together. We got a ghostly treasure hunt, sort of, kind of, maybe, perhaps, with a guy called Parkins and a Mr. Rogers. Looking forward to it. I'm just gonna let that come up, and we're gonna continue. On the following day, Parkins did, as he had hoped, succeed in getting away from his college, and in arriving at Bernstow. He was made welcome at the Globe Inn, was safely installed in the large double-bedded room of which we have heard, and was able, before retiring, to rest to arrange his materials for work in apple pie order upon a commodious table which occupied the outer end of the room, and was surrounded on three sides by windows looking out seaward. That is to say, the central window looked straight out to sea, and those on the left and right commanded prospects along the shore to the north and south, respectively. On the south, you see the village of Bernstow. On the north, no houses were to be seen, but only the beach and the low cliff backing it. Immediately in front was a strip, not considerable, of rough grass, dotted with old anchors, and so forth. Then a broad path, then the beach. Whatever may have been the original distance between the Globe Inn and the sea, not more than 60 yards now separated them. The rest of the population of the inn was, of course, a golfing one, and included few elements that call for a special description. The most conspicuous figure was, perhaps, that of an ancien militaire, an ancient soldier, a secretary of a London club, and translate French veteran. Well, yeah. Okay, nice. Ancien militaire. The most conspicuous figure was perhaps that of a veteran, secretary of a London club, and possessed of a voice of incredible strength and of views of a pronouncedly Protestant type. These were apt to find utterance after his attendance upon the Sorry, I'm checking things as I'm. You know what? I'm just gonna get out of this stuff and not check things anymore because I think it's just messing up the stream. So, continuing. These were apt to find utterance after his attendance upon the ministrations of the vicar, an estimable man with inclinations towards a picturesque ritual, which he gallantly kept down as far as he could out of deference to East Anglian tradition. Professor Parkins, one of those whose principal characteristics was pluck, spent the greater part of the day following his arrival at Bernstow in what he had called improving his game, in company with this Colonel Wilson, and during the afternoon, whether the process of improvement were to blame or not, I am not sure. The colonel's demeanor assumed a coloring so lurid that even Parkins jibbed at the thought of walking home with him from the links. He determined, after a short and furtive look at that bristling mustache and those incarnadined features incarnadined, bright crimson or pinkish red. I like that. Red. Bristling mustache and those incarnadined features, that it would be wiser to allow the influences of tea and tobacco to do what they could with the colonel before the dinner hour should render a meeting inevitable. I might walk home tonight along the beach, he reflected. Yes, and take a look there will and take a look. There will be light enough for that, at the ruins of which Disney was talking. I don't exactly know where they are, by the way, but I expect I can hardly help stumbling on them. This is accomplished. I almost feel like what? I don't know. This is accomplished, I may say, in the most literal sense, for in picking his way from the links to the shingle beach, his foot caught partly in a gorse root and partly in a biggish stone, and over he went. When he got up and surveyed his surroundings, he found himself in a patch of somewhat broken ground, covered with small depressions and mounds. These latter, when he came to examine them, proved to be simply masses of flints embedded in mortar and grown over with turf. He must, he quite rightly concluded, be on the site of the preceptory he had promised to look at. It seemed not unlikely to reward the spade of the explorer. Enough of the foundations was probably left at no throw, a good deal of light on the... Ah! The frightfulness of this is the grammar. Enough of the foundations was probably left at no throw, a good deal of light on the general plan. Sure. He remembered vaguely that the Templars, to whom this site had belonged, were in the habit of building round churches, and he thought a particular series of the humps or mounds near him did appear to be arranged in something of a circular form. Few people can resist the temptation to try a little amateur research in a department quite outside their own, if only for the satisfaction of showing how successful they would have been had they only taken it up seriously. Our professor, however, if he felt something of this mean desire, was also truly anxious to oblige Mr. Disney. So he paced with care the circular area he had noticed, and wrote down its rough dimensions in his pocketbook. Then he proceeded to examine an oblong eminence which lay east of the center of the circle, and seemed to his thinking likely to be the base of a platform or altar. At one end of it, the northern, a patch of the turf was gone, removed by some boy or other creature. Is it going to be like feral and natural? I think so. Wild, nature, wild animal, a wild animal, or other creature. It might, he thought, be as well to probe the soil here for evidences of masonry. And he took out his knife and began scraping away the earth. And now followed another little discovery. A portion of soil fell inward as he scraped, and disclosed a small cavity. He lighted one match after another to help him to see of what nature the hole was. But the wind was too strong for them all. By tapping and scratching the sides with his knife, however, he was able to make out that it must be an artificial hole in masonry. It was rectangular, and the sides, top and bottom, if not actually plastered, were smooth and regular. Of course it was empty. No, as he withdrew the knife, he heard a metallic clink, and when he introduced his hand, it met with a cylindrical object lying on the floor of the hole. Naturally enough, he picked it up, and when he brought it into the light, now fast fading, he could see that it too was of man's making. A metal tube about 4 inches long, and evidently of some considerable age. By the time Parkins had made sure that there was nothing else in this odd receptacle, it was too late and too dark for him to think of undertaking any further search. What he had done had proved so unexpectedly interesting that he determined to sacrifice a little more of the daylight on the morrow to archaeology. The object which he now had safe in his pocket was bound to be of some slight value at least. He felt sure. Bleak and solemn was the view on which he took a last look before starting homeward. A faint yellow light in the west showed the links, on which a few figures, moving towards the clubhouse, were still visible. The squat Martello Tower, the lights of Aldsey village, the pale ribbon of sands intersected at intervals by black wooden groin. What? A groin, a low wall or sturdy timber barrier built out into the sea from a beach to check erosion and drifting. Interesting. Okay, the dim and murmuring sea. The wind was bitter from the north, but was at his back when he set out for the globe. He quickly rattled and clashed through the shingle and gained the sand, upon which, but for the groins which had to be got over every few yards, the going was both good and quiet. One last look behind, to measure the distance he had made since leaving the ruined Templars' church, showed him a prospect of company on his walk. in the shape of a rather indistinct personage who seemed to be making great effort to catch up with him, but made little, if any, progress. I mean that there was an appearance of running about his movements, but that the distance between him and Parkins did not seem materially to lessen. So at least, Parkins thought, and decided that he almost certainly did not know him, and that it would be absurd to wait until he came up. For all that, company, he began to think. For all that, company, he began to think, would really be very welcome on that lonely shore, if only you could choose your companion. In his unenlightened days, he had read of meetings in such places which even now would hardly bear thinking of. He went on thinking of them, however, until he reached home, and particularly of one which catches most people's fancy at some time of their childhood. Now I saw in my dream that Christian had gone but a very little way when he saw a foul fiend coming over the field to meet him. What should I do now, he thought, if I looked back and caught sight of a black figure sharply defined against the yellow sky and saw that it had horns and wings? I wonder whether I should stand or run for it. Luckily, the gentleman behind is not of that kind, and he seems to be about as far off now as when I saw him first. Well, at this rate, he won't get his dinner as soon as I shall, and dear me, it's within a quarter of an hour of the time now. I must run. Parkins had, in fact, very little time for dressing. When he met the colonel at dinner, peace, or as much of her as that gentleman could manage, reigned once more in the military bosom. Nor was she put to flight in the hours of bridge that followed dinner, for Parkins was a more than respectable player. When, therefore, he retired towards 12 o'clock, he felt that he had spent his evening in quite a satisfactory way, and that, even for so long as a fortnight on 3 weeks, life at the Globe would be supportable under similar condition, especially, thought he, if I go on improving my game. As he went along the passages, he met the boots of the Globe, who stopped and said, "Beg your pardon, sir, but as I was a-brushing your coat just now, there was something fell out of the pocket. I put it on your chest of drawers, sir, in your room, sir. A piece of a pipe or something of that sort, sir. Thank you, sir. You'll find it on your chest of drawers, sir. Yes, sir. Good night, sir." This speech served to remind Parkins of his little discovery of that afternoon. It was with some considerable curiosity that he turned it over by the light of his candles. It was of bronze, he now saw, and was shaped very much after the manner of the modern dog whistle. In fact, it was, yes, certainly no more nor less than a whistle. He put it to his lips, but it was quite full of a fine, caked-up sand or earth, which would not yield to knocking, but must be loosened with a knife. Tidy as ever in his habits, Parkins cleared out the earth onto a piece of paper and took the latter to the window to empty it out. The night was clear and bright, as he saw when he had opened the casement, and he stopped for an instant to look at the sea, and not a belated wanderer stationed on the shore in front of the inn. Then he shut the window, a little surprised at the late hours people kept at Burnstow, and took his whistle to the light again. Why, surely there were marks on it, not merely marks, but letters. A very little rubbing rendered the deeply cut inscription quite legible, but the professor had to confess, after some earnest thought, that the meaning of it was as obscure to him as the writing on the wall of Belshazzar. There were legends both on the front and on the back of the whistle. The one read thus: "La fur blankbis and full." The other, "Qui est." I'm not going to try because I'm just going to ruin it, but I think it's "Who is here, who comes." Potentially. Detect. I kind of assumed it was French. Could also be, I don't know. Who is this coming? Oh, Latin. Okay, there we go. Who is this who comes? Ooh. So excited. Okay, I ought to be able to make it out, he thought. But I suppose I am a little rusty in my Latin. Oh, there we go. When I come to think of it, I don't believe I even know the word for a whistle. The long one does seem simple enough. It ought to mean, who is this and who is coming, all right? Well, the best way to find out is evidently to whistle for him. No, don't do it. He blew tentatively and stopped suddenly, startled and yet pleased at the note he had elicited. It had a quality of infinite distance in it, and soft it was, he somehow felt it must be audible for miles around. It was a sound, too, that seemed to have the power, which many scents possess, of forming pictures in the brain. He saw quite clearly for a moment a vision of a wide, dark expanse at night, with a fresh wind blowing, and in the midst a lonely figure. How employed, he could not tell. Perhaps he would have seen more had not the picture been broken by the sudden surge of a gust of wind against his casement, so sudden that it made him look up, just in time to see the white glint of a sea-bird's wing somewhere outside the dark panes. I want to look one more time. Oh no, don't do that. Ah. Okay, good. I just want to flat for this full. Okay. We shall see. Okay, here we go. The sound of the whistle had so fascinated. Hi! It's been a while. It's kind of a one-off for me. So yeah, but I wanted to do ghost stories. And it's good to see you again. Well, speak with you. So yeah, so we're doing a ghost story for today. And it's just starting to get to the ghostly parts, I believe. And I hope it's horrific enough to satisfy the Spooktober time. The sound of the whistle had so fascinated him that he could not help trying it once more, this time more boldly. The note was little, if at all, louder than before, and repetition broke the illusion. No picture followed, as he had half hoped it might. But what is this? Goodness, what force the wind can get up in a few minutes. What a tremendous gust. There, I knew that window fastening was no use. Ah, I thought so. Both candles out. It's enough to tear the room to pieces. The first thing was to get the window shut. While you might count 20, Parkins was struggling with the small casement and felt almost as if he were pushing back a sturdy burglar. So strong was the pressure. It slackened all at once, and the window banged to and latched itself. Now to relight the candles and see what damage, if any, had been done. No, nothing seemed amiss. No glass even was broken in the casement, but the noise had evidently roused at least one member of the household. The colonel was to be heard stumping in his stockinged feet on the floor above and growling. Oh, well, okay, so I haven't been streaming recently. My living situation has changed, so I can't, but for my birthday, I decided I wanted to do ghost stories. So I was able to find some time for myself to do ghost stories because that was what I was kind of most looking forward to when I started this because I like ghost stories, especially in Spooktober. So yeah, so this is just a one-off, and then I'm probably not going to I'm likely not going to stream again for a while again until my living situation changes once again. But for now, we have ghost stories, and that's good. Quickly as it had risen, the wind did not fall at once. On it went, moaning and rushing past the house, at time rising to a cry so desolate that, as Parkins disinterestedly said, it might have made fanciful people feel quite uncomfortable. Even the unimaginative, he thought, after a quarter of an hour, might be happier without it. Whether it was the wind or the excitement of golf or of the researches in the preceptory that kept Parkins awake, he was not sure. Awake he remained in any case, long enough to fancy, as I am afraid I often do myself under such conditions, that he was the victim of all manner of fatal disorders. He would lie counting the beats of his heart, convinced that it was going to stop working at every moment, and would entertain grave suspicions of his lungs, brain, liver, etc., suspicions which he was sure would be dispelled by the return of daylight, but which until then refused to be put aside. He found a little vicarious comfort in the idea that someone else was in the same boat. A near neighbor, in the darkness it was not easy to tell his direction, was tossing and rustling in his bed too. The next stage was that Parkins shut his eyes and determined to give sleep every chance. Here again, overexcitement asserted itself in another form, that of making pictures. Now we'll get the proper translation. Expert evidence, maybe? Pictures. Pictures do come to the closed eyes of one trying to sleep, and are often so little to his taste that he must open his eyes and disperse them. Parkins's experience on this occasion was a very distressing one. He found that the picture which presented itself to him was continuous. When he opened his eyes, of course, it went, but when he shut them once more, it framed itself afresh, and acted itself out again, neither quicker nor slower than before. What he saw was this: a long stretch of shore, shingle-edged by sand and intersected at short intervals with black groins running down to the water. A scene, in fact, so like that of his afternoon's walk that, in the absence of any landmark, it could not be distinguished therefrom. The light was obscure, conveying an impression of gathering storm, late winter evening, and slight, cold rain. On this bleak stage, at first, no actor was visible. Then, in the distance, a bobbing black object appeared. A moment more, and it was a man. Ooh, adjust. And it was a man running, jumping, clambering over the groins, and every few seconds looking eagerly back. The nearer he came, the more obvious it was that he was not only anxious, but even terribly frightened, though his face was not to be distinguished. He was, moreover, almost at the end of his strength. On he came. Each successive obstacle seemed to cause him more difficulty than the last. Will he get over this next one? Thought Parkins. It seems a little higher than the others. Oh, okay. Trust me. So here again, overexcitement asserted itself in another form, that of making pictures. Trust me, pictures do come to the closed eyes of one trying to sleep, and are often so little to his taste that he must open his eyes and disperse them. Thank you, that makes a lot more sense. Okay, good, good. Okay, and is he going to get over this? Thought Parkins seems a little higher than the others. Yes, half climbing, half throwing himself, he did get over, and fell all in a heap on the other side, the side nearest to the spectator. There, as if really unable to get up again, he remained crouching under the groin, looking up in an attitude of painful anxiety. So far, no cause whatever for the fear of the runner had been shown, but now there began to be seen, far up the shore, a little flicker of something light-colored moving to and fro with great swiftness and irregularity. Rapidly growing larger, it, too, declared itself as a figure in pale, fluttering draperies, ill-defined. There was something about its motion which made Parkins very unwilling to see it at close quarters. It would stop, raise its arms, bow itself towards the sand, then run, stooping across the beach to the water's edge, and back again, and then, rising upright, once more continue its course forward at a speed that was startling and terrifying. The moment came when the pursuer was hovering about from left to right, only a few yards beyond the groin where the runner lay in hiding. After two or three ineffectual casting hither and thither, it came to a stop, stood upright, with arms raised high, and then darted straight forward towards the groin. It was at this point that Parkins always failed in his resolution to keep his eyes shut. With many misgivings as to incipient failure of eyesight, overworked brain, excessive smoking, and so on, he finally resigned himself to light his candle, get out a book, and pass the night waking, rather than be tormented by this persistent panorama, which he saw clearly enough could only be a morbid reflection of his walk and his thoughts on that very day. The scraping of match on box and the glare of light must have startled some creatures of the night, rats or what not, which he heard scurry across the floor from the side of his bed with much rustling. Dear, dear, the match is out. Fool that it is. But the second one burnt better, and a candle and book were duly procured, over which Parkins pored till sleep of a wholesome kind came upon him, and that in no long space, for about the first time in his orderly and prudent life, he forgot to blow out the candle, and when he was called next morning at 8, there was still a flicker in the socket, and a sad mess of guttered grease on the top of the little table. After breakfast, he was in his room, putting the finishing touches to his golfing costume. Fortune had again allotted the colonel to him for a partner, when one of the maids came in. "Oh, if you please, I assume." "Oh, if you please," she said. "Would you like any extra blankets on your bed, sir?" "Ah, thank you," said Parkins. "Yes, I think I should like one. It seems likely to turn rather colder." In a very short time, the maid was back with the blanket. "Which bed should I put it on, sir?" she asked. "What? Why, that one, the one I slept in last night," he said, pointing to it. "Oh, yes, I beg your pardon, sir, but you seem to have tried both of 'em. Leastways, we had to make 'em both up this morning." "Really? How very absurd," said Parkins. "I certainly never touched the other. Expect to lay some things on it. Did it actually seem to have been slept in?" "Oh, yes, sir," said the maid. "Why, all the things was crumbled and throwed about all ways. If you'll excuse me, sir, quite as if anyone hadn't passed but a very poor night, sir." "Dear me," said Parkins. "Well, I may have disordered it more than I thought when I unpacked my things. I'm very sorry to have given you the extra trouble, I'm sure. I expect a friend of mine soon, by the way, gentleman from Cambridge, to come and occupy it for a night or two. That will be all right, I suppose, won't it?" "Oh, yes, to be sure, sir. Thank you, sir. It's no trouble, I'm sure," said the maid, and departed to giggle with her colleagues. Parkins set forth with a stern determination to improve his game. Ooh, I'm so excited. I am glad to be able to report that he succeeded so far in this enterprise that the colonel, who had been rather repining at the prospect of a second day's play in his company, became quite chatty as the morning advanced, and his voice boomed out over the flats, as certain also of our own minor poets have said, like some great Borden in a minster tower. "Extraordinary wind that we had last night," he said. "In my old home we should have said someone had been whistling for it." "Ooh, should you indeed?" said Parkins. "Is there a superstition of that kind still current in your part of the country?" "I don't know about superstition," said the colonel. They believe in it all over Denmark and Norway, as well as on the Yorkshire coast. And my experience is, mind you, that there's generally something at the bottom of what these country folk hold to, and have held to for generations. But it's your drive, or whatever it might have been. The golfing reader will have to imagine appropriate digression at the proper intervals. I love insertions like that. When conversation was resumed, Parkins said, with a slight hesitancy, "Apropos of what you were saying just now, Colonel, I think I ought to tell you that my own views on such subjects are very strong. I am, in fact, a convinced disbeliever in what is called the supernatural." "What?" said the colonel. "Do you mean to tell me you don't believe in second sight, or ghosts, or anything of that kind?" "In nothing whatever of that kind," returned Parkins firmly. "Well," said the colonel, "and it appears to me at that rate, sir, that you must be little better than a Sadducee." Parkins was on the point of answering that, in his opinion, the Sadducees were the most sensible persons he had ever read of in the Old Testament, but, feeling some doubt as to whether much mention of them was to be found in that work, he preferred to laugh the accusation off. "Perhaps I am," he said, "but here, give me my cleek, boy. Excuse me one moment, Colonel." A short interval. "Now, as to whistling for the wind, let me give you my theory about it. The laws which govern winds are really not at all perfectly known to fisher folk and such, of course, not known at all. A man or woman of eccentric habits, perhaps, or a stranger, is seen repeatedly on the beach at some unusual hour, and is heard whistling. Soon afterwards a violent wind arises. A man who could read the sky perfectly, or who possessed a barometer, could have foretold that it would. The simple people of a fishing village have no barometers, and only a few rough rules for prophesying the weather. What more natural than that the eccentric personage I postulated should be regarded as having raised the wind, or that he or she should clutch eagerly at the reputation of being able to do so? Now take last night's wind. As it happens, I myself was whistling. I blew a whistle twice, and the wind seemed to come absolutely to answer to my call. If anyone had seen me, the audience had been a little restive under this harangue, and Parkins had, I fear, fallen somewhat into the tone of a lecturer, but at the last sentence the colonel stopped him. "Whistling, were you?" he said. "And what sort of whistle did you use? Play the stroke first." Interval. "About that whistle you were asking, Colonel. It's rather a curious one. I have it in my— No, I see I've left it in my room. As a matter of fact, I found it yesterday." And then Parkins narrated the manner of his discovery of the whistle, upon hearing which the colonel grunted and opined that, in Parkins's place, he should himself be careful about using a thing that had belonged to a set of papists, of whom, speaking generally, it might be affirmed that you never knew what they might not have been up to. From this topic he diverged to the enormities of the vicar, who had given notice on the previous Sunday that Friday would be the feast of St. Thomas the Apostle, and that there would be a service at 11 o'clock in the church. This and other similar proceedings constituted in the colonel's view a strong presumption that the vicar was a concealed papist, if not a Jesuit, and Parkins, who could not very readily follow the colonel in this region, did not disagree with him. In fact, they got on so well together in the morning that there was no talk on either side of their separating after lunch. Both continued to play well during the afternoon, or, at least, well enough to make them forget everything else until the light began to fail them. Not until then did Parkins remember that he had meant to do some more investigating at the preceptory. Or the preceptory? I thought it said perceptory. But it was of no great importance, he reflected. One day was as good as another. He might as well go home with the colonel. As they turned the corner of the house, the colonel was almost knocked down by a boy who rushed into him at the very top of his speed, and then, instead of running away, remained hanging on to him and panting. The first words of the warrior were naturally those of reproof and objurgation, but he very quickly discerned that the boy was almost speechless with fright. Inquiries were useless at first. When the boy got his breath, he began to howl, and still clung to the colonel's legs. He was at last detached, but continued to howl. "What in the world is the matter with you? What have you been up to? What have you seen?" said the two men. "Oh, I seen it wive out me out of the sorry. "Oh, I seen it wive at me out of the winder," wailed the boy, "and I don't like it." "What window?" said the irritated colonel. "Come, pull yourself together, my boy. The front wonder it was at the hotel, said the boy. I apologize for the horrible accent. I'm trying. At this point, Parkins was in favor of sending the boy home, but the colonel refused. He wanted to get to the bottom of it. He said it was most dangerous to give a boy such a fright as this one had had, and if it turned out that people had been playing jokes, they should suffer for it in some way. And by a series of questions, he made out this story. The boy had been playing about on the grass in front of the globe with some others. Then they had gone home to their teas, and he was just going, when he happened to look up at the front window and see it a-wiving at him. It seemed to be a figure of some sort, in white as far as he knew. Couldn't see its face, but it waved at him, and it warn't a right thing, not to say not a right person. Was there a light in the room? No, he didn't think to look at if there was a light. Which was the window? Was it the top one or the second one? The second one it was. The big window what's got two little ones on the sides. I used to do accents. I can't. Very well, my boy, said the colonel, after a few more questions. You run away home now. I expect it was some person trying to give you a start. Another time, like a brave English boy, you just throw a stone. Well, no, not that exactly, but you go and speak to the waiter, or to Mr. Simpson, the landlord, and, yes, and say that I advised you to do so. The boy's face expressed some of the doubt he felt as to the likelihood of Mr. Simpson's lending a favorable ear to his complaint. But the colonel did not appear to perceive this, and went on, "And here's a sixpence. No, I see it's a shilling, and you be off home, and don't think any more about it." The youth hurried off with agitated thanks, and the colonel and Parkins went round to the front of the globe and reconnoitered. There was only one window answering to the description they had been hearing. "Well, that's curious," said Parkins. "It's evidently my window the lad was talking about. Will you come up for a moment, Colonel Wilson? We ought to be able to see if anyone has been taking liberties in my room." They were soon in the passage, and Parkins made as if to open the door. Then he stopped and felt in his pockets. "This is more serious than I thought." "This is more serious than he thought," was his next remark. "I remember now that before I started this morning, I locked the door. It is locked now, and what is more, here is the key." And he held it up. "Now," he went on, "if the servants are in the habit of going into one's room during the day when one is away, I can only say that I don't approve of it at all." Conscious of a somewhat weak climax, he busied himself in opening the door, which was indeed locked, and in lighting candles. "No," he said, "nothing seems disturbed." "Except your bed," put in the colonel. "Excuse me, that isn't my bed," said Parkins. "I don't use that one, but it does look as if someone had been playing tricks with it." It certainly did. The clothes were bundled up and twisted together in a most tortuous confusion. Parkins pondered. "That must be it," he said at last. "I disordered the clothes last night in unpacking, and they haven't made it since. Perhaps they came in to make it, and that boy saw them through the window, and then they were called away and locked the door after them. Yes, I think that must be it." "Well, ring and ask," said the colonel, and this appealed to Parkins as practical. The maid appeared, and to make a long story short, deposed that she had made the bed in the morning when the gentleman was in the room, and hadn't been there since. No, she hadn't no other key. Mr. Simpson, he kept the keys. He'd be able to tell the gentleman if anyone had been up. This was a puzzle. Investigation showed that nothing of value had been taken, and Parkins remembered the disposition of the small objects on tables and so forth well enough to be pretty sure that no pranks had been played with them. Mr. Simpson furthermore agreed that neither of them had given the duplicate key of the room to any person whatever during the day. Nor could Parkins, fair-minded man as he was, detect anything in the demeanor of master, mistress, or maid that indicated guilt. He was much more inclined to think that the boy had been imposing on the colonel. The latter was unwontedly silent and pensive at dinner and throughout the evening. When he bade good night to Parkins, he murmured in a gruff undertone, "You know where I am if you want me during the night." "Why, yes, thank you, Colonel Wilson. I think I do, but there isn't much prospect of my disturbing you, I hope. By the way," he added, "did I show you that old whistle I spoke of? I think not. Well, here it is." The colonel turned it over gingerly in the light of the candle. "Can you make anything of the inscription?" asked Parkins as he took it back. "No, not in this light. What do you mean to do with it?" "Oh, well, when I get back to Cambridge, I shall submit it to some of the archaeologists there, and see what they think of it, and very likely, if they consider it worth having, I may present it to one of the museums." Said the colonel. "Well, you may be right. All I know is that if it were mine, I should chuck it straight into the sea. It's no use talking, I'm well aware, but I expect that with you it's a case of live and learn. I hope so, I'm sure, and I wish you a good night." He turned away, leaving Parkins at the bottom of the stairs, about to make some reply. Soon each was in his own bedroom. By some unfortunate accident, there was neither blinds nor curtains to the windows of the professor's room. The previous night he had thought little of this, but tonight there seemed every prospect of a bright moon rising directly on his bed, and probably wake him later on. When he noticed this, he was a good deal annoyed, but, with an ingenuity which I can only envy, he succeeded in rigging up, with the help of a railway rug, some safety pins, a stick, and an umbrella, a screen which, if it only held together, would completely keep the moonlight off his bed. And shortly afterwards he was comfortably in that bed. When he had read a somewhat solid work long enough to produce a decided wish for sleep, he cast a drowsy glance round the room, blew out the candle, and fell back upon the pillow. He must have slept soundly for an hour or more, when a sudden clatter shook him up in a most unwelcome manner. In a moment he realized what had happened. His carefully constructed screen had given way, and a very bright, frosty moon was shining directly on his face. This was highly annoying. Could he possibly get up and reconstruct the screen? Could he manage to sleep if he did not? For some minutes he lay and pondered over the possibilities. Then he turned over sharply, and with all his eyes open, lay breathlessly listening. There had been a movement, he was sure, on the empty bed on the opposite side of the room. Tomorrow he would have it moved, for there must be rats or something playing about in it. It was quiet now. No, the commotion began again. There was a rustling and shaking, surely more than any rat could cause. I can figure to myself something of the professor's bewilderment and horror, for I have in a dream 30 years back seen the same thing happen. But the reader will hardly, perhaps, imagine how dreadful it was to him to see a figure suddenly sit up in what he had known was an empty bed. He was out of his own bed in one bound and made a dash towards the window where lay his only weapon, the stick with which he had propped his screen. This was, as it turned out, the worst thing he could have done, because the personage in the empty bed, with a sudden, smooth motion, slipped from the bed and took up a position, with outspread arms, between the two beds and in front of the door. Parkins watched it in a horrid perplexity. Somehow the idea of getting past it and escaping through the door was intolerable to him. He could not have borne, he didn't know why, to touch it, and as for its touching him, he would sooner dash himself through the window than have that happen. It stood for the moment in a bend of dark shadow, and he could not see what its face was like. Now it began to move, in a stopping posture, and all at once the spectator realized, with some horror and some relief, that it must be blind, for it seemed to feel about it with its muffled arms in a groping and random fashion. Turning half away from him, it became suddenly conscious of the bed he had just left, and darted towards it, and bent over and felt the pillows in a way which made Parkins shudder, as he had never in his life thought it possible. In a very few moments it seemed to know that the bed was empty, and then, moving forward into the area of light and facing the window, it showed for the first time what manner of thing it was. Parkins, who very much dislikes being questioned about it, did once describe something of it in my hearing, and I gathered that what he chiefly remembers about it is a horrible, an intensely horrible face of crumpled linen. What expression he read upon it he could not or would not tell, but that the fear of it went nigh to maddening him is certain. But he was not at leisure to watch it for long. With formidable quickness it moved into the middle of the room, and, as it stopped and waved, one corner of its draperies swept across Parkins's face. He could not, though he knew how perilous a sound was, he could not keep back a cry of disgust, and this gave the searcher an instant clue. It leapt towards him upon the instant, and the next moment he was halfway through the window backwards, uttering cry upon cry at the utmost pitch of his voice, and the linen face was thrust close into his own. At this, almost the last possible second, deliverance came. As you will have guessed, the colonel burst the door open, and was just in time to see the dreadful group at the window. When he reached the figures, only one was left. Parkins sank forward into the room in a faint, and before him on the floor lay a tumbled heap of bedclothes. Ooh, okay. Colonel Wilson asked no questions, but busied himself in keeping everyone else out of the room and in getting Parkins back to his bed. He himself, wrapped in a rug, occupied the other bed for the rest of the night. Early on the next day, Rogers arrived, more welcome than he would have been a day before, and the three of them held a very long consultation in the professor's room. At the end of it, the colonel left the hotel door carrying a small object between his finger and thumb, which he cast as far into the sea as a very brawny arm could send it. Later on, the smoke of a bonfire ascended from the back premises of the Globe. Exactly what explanation was patched up for the staff and visitors at the hotel, I must confess I do not recollect. The professor was somehow cleared of the ready suspicion of delirium tremens, and the hotel of the rep- and the hotel of the reputation and blah, blah, blah. The professor was somehow cleared of the ready suspicion of delirium tremens, and the hotel of the reputation of a trouble house. There is not much question as to what would have happened to Parkins if the colonel had not intervened when he did. He would either have fallen out of the window or else lost his wits. But it is not so evident what more the creature that came in answer to the whistle could have done than frighten. There seemed to be absolutely nothing material about it save the bedclothes of which it had made itself a body. The colonel, who remembered a not very dissimilar occurrence in India, was of the opinion that if Parkins had closed with it, it could really have done very little, and that its one power was that of frightening. The whole thing, he said, served to confirm his opinion of the Church of Rome. There is really nothing more to tell, but, as you may imagine, the professor's views on certain points are less clear-cut than they used to be. His nerves, too, have suffered. He cannot even now see a surplice hanging on a door quite unmoved, and the spectacle of a scarecrow in a field late on a winter afternoon has cost him more than one sleepless night. End of that story, which was, "Oh, whistle and I will come to you, my lad." That was good. I enjoyed it. It wasn't quite what I was going for when it comes to the ghost stories. I guess I would say it was a little slow in the beginning, but yet it needed that introduction. I enjoyed the meta of it. But I guess it's Spooktober, so I'm thinking more Telltale Heart, where it's just kind of all the way through. And I have enjoyed it wasn't very spooky. It was, yeah. I'm kind of disappointed. Like, I enjoyed the story, but it wasn't all that spooky. Ah, that's true. Um, that's something that I actually noticed because I like to watch. Well, I mean, it's nothing interesting or special. I like to watch horror movies for during Halloween. I'm not usually a big fan, but it's Spooktober, of course. But like, I watched The Shining last year, I think, and the thing is all of those things that it did first, like you said, they're so familiar now because everything has used it. But since I watched that original after all the other ones, it didn't seem as classic, I guess, or as um or yeah, I guess like as interesting or spooky because you already know it. Um so I guess I should have just kept going with Poe probably because I don't think I've been disappointed so far with that. There was another one that if if it's short enough, I may quick do it because I was thinking that maybe, hang on, which one was it? I'll see if this one, because I might be able, oh, it's only 8 pages. Because this one is, hang on, I'm going to turn my thing off so I can actually Google it. So this one I was curious about because um, apparently the author is a surrealist. And yep. Yeah, and so the ones nowadays you watch and they use those things that were so good, those aspects that were so good back then, but they use them so horribly. So you know it, but they don't use it properly to make it actually good. So yeah, yeah. Oh yes. Oh yes. I have lots of thoughts about the cinema of nowadays. But here, I'll see if this one would be at all interesting, if maybe I would be able to do one more because I was so looking forward to ghost stories. Um Ah, Izumo. Oops. There. Okay. Ooh. Oh, oh, okay. I may have to read this one because somebody just said so. Izumi Kyoka is known as the Japanese Edgar Allan Poe. So I will see. Mm, okay, one sec. I just need to see if I have time. I'm gonna see how long this one is, and then I will potentially do that one because I think partly because I'm reading another book that was translated and it's fantastic. So I have that sort of thing, that sort of complex where if it's translated, it's good. Tale of Three Who Were Blind. Word count. Oh, word count. Word count. Yeah, so what I was reading about. Yeah, yep, that's what I was thinking. Because in terms word count is typically anywhere from no, okay, I don't okay, I'm not well, okay. So the one I just read, did it say it was 14 pages? Ah, can't remember. Okay, I just need to look. Oop, oop, oop. Boop, doop. Yes, this one. And it says, so it'll take me half that time potentially, probably. Okay, so I think I have some more time. So we're just gonna go ahead and do it because not that I was disappointed, but I want something spooky. So I guess we're just gonna go ahead and go into it, not knowing what it is. So it is A Tale of Three Who Were Blind, translated by Edward Seidensticker, is that written by Izumi Kyoka, known as Japanese Edgar Allan Poe. And I'm so excited. So hopefully this one goes better than the last one. And if not, I mean, hopefully it's at least somewhat interesting. Okay, here we go. One moment. You, sir. At the voice, a chill shot down Sakagami's back. And I apologize for any, yay! I apologize for any horrible pronunciation. At the voice, a chill shot down Sakagami's back, though not as at a voice he remembered and disliked. From the foot of the hill, he had seen them creeping down toward him from Yatsuya, appearing and disappearing, floating up and falling back again, in the mist that huddled in motionless spirals halfway up the slope. He could hardly hear the sound of their feet, and then, as they passed, that voice. They were nothing to him, and yet he knew that something must happen before he would be allowed to pass. They would call him, they would stop him. He was strangely sure that somehow he must hear a voice. It might be as when a traveler hears the cry of a raven or the scream of a night heron and cannot be sure, even if he is quite alone, that the call has been at him. But Sakagami knew that he would have to hear that unpleasant, that odious voice. Three blind ones in single file. In the center was a woman, perhaps in her middle years, white-throated, thick-haired, her shoulders thin and slight. The long sleeves, falling down from her folded arms, were of a darkness that seemed to sink through to the thin breasts beneath, and their trailing edges gave way to a like darkness in the obi. Was the slapping from her sandals? But the long skirt brushed the ground and hid her feet. The man in front wore a limp, loose garment, gray perhaps in the darkness, almost like the night mist itself, spun and woven. His brimless cap shot into the air, a veritable mitre. His gaunt body swayed as he drew near, and passed. The other man, slender and of no more than a medium height, clung to the woman as if he meant to hide in the shadow of her hair. Though Sakagami had had no clear view of any of them, the third had been the most obscure of all. And yet Sakagami knew immediately that he had been stopped by this shadowy one. Are you speaking to me? Sakagami looked back. His shoulders were hunched in the sudden chill, and his answer was like a curse flung at a barking dog. I am speaking to you. The voice was low. It was indeed the slight man in the rear. He seemed to straighten up as he spoke to Sakagami, who was 2 or 3 paces up the hill from him. He held his staff at an angle, an oar with which to row his way through the mist. The other two, the long in front, and the high Japanese coiffure, Sakagami could not be sure what style, like a wig on an actor's wig stand, suspended upside down, stood diagonally down the slope with their backs to their companion. Sakagami turned on his heels to stare at the man. And what do you want? I should like to talk to you. Whether he was very sure of himself or out of breath, his slowness seemed wrong in the cold of the late winter night. What is it? Coming toward him in the mist, they had seemed like 2 grave markers, a tall one and a low one, blown in by a last gust of the autumn winds from some cemetery on the moors, the dead tufts of grass white in the earth still clinging to their bases. But his tone became more gentle as he saw that the three, groping their way along this shabby, deserted street, as through the caves on the Musashino plain, were only 3 blind ones who made their living by massaging and who had set out together, who would blow the flutes that were the sign of their trade, as thin and high in the winter night as the sound of a mosquito in January, and who would presently disappear behind the lantern of a poor rooming house. I have little to say, but I should like to know where you are going. Where? There was a touch of derision in the nasal tone. His head cocked to one side, the man looked up at Sakagami. He raised his hand as if to scratch his ear and tapped at the head of the staff. It makes no difference, said Sakagami testily. He was going to meet a woman who had been forbidden to see him. Does it matter where I'm going? It does. I am sorry, sir, but it does. There was a strength in the voice that kept Sakagami fixed to the spot. And why? Sakagami turned and started down toward the man, but he pulled back as the mist clutched at his face. It is late. The voice was suddenly strong. The head bowed heavily toward the earth. Longhead, in front, turned slowly to face the bank above the road. The woman seemed to sink into the earth as she sat down disconsolately on her heels. The tip of her staff was white against the dark hair. Seeing that the three meant to stay, Sakagami resigned himself to being delayed, but at the thought of what lay ahead, his chest rose and fell violently, as if poison were being forced in through his mouth. A rising, a rush of blood, and a collapse with an angry tremor of the flesh. Banks rose on both sides like mountain slopes. Against the sky, over the bank toward which Longhead faced, 1 or 2 barrack-style houses stood like tea huts on a mountain pass, tight and dark. Not a sliver of light escaped from them. On the bank, dead grass blanketed by the mist as by a frost. On the side of the road where the three had stopped, the bank had slid away, exposing the roots of trees and the retaining stakes. Trees sent up their skeleton forms above. Here and there the mist clung to the branches like dirty moonlight. There were no stars. The bottom of a defile in Yotsuya, like the bottom of a mountain ravine, at 1 o'clock in the morning. Only the racing in the chest. Is it wrong to be so late? The words themselves only seemed to be weighed down by the heavy air. You're very certain to say that. The man slapped the back of the hand that held the staff. It is wrong, very wrong indeed. I am not to go on then. Perhaps this oracle could tell him something of the meeting that was to come. If you will go on, whatever I say, let that be the end of it. But I must stop you for a moment. I alone, or that gentleman too. Longhead coughed faintly as the other brought his staff upright. And what if I have to go? Sakagami's breath came faster. What if my father is dying, or a friend is ill? How can you know? You speak as though I were doing something wrong. The man bent his head as though to rub his cheek against the staff, and laughed unpleasantly. I know where you are going, and that gentleman says I must speak. Shall I tell you? It will be no trouble, and you will tell me I am right. You go to meet a woman. Sakagami did not answer. She has duties and ties. There are obstacles and complications, but you have pushed and slashed and broken down fences and walls. You have pressed her with an urgency that would tear her very breast open, and she will meet you at the risk of her life. You are on your way to meet her. I knew from your footsteps as you came up, and met us, and passed. I knew a man rushing along, out of his senses. Dew falls, frost falls, the moon clouds over, the stars are dark. In the wide skies, too, there are shadows. The shadows are gentle, but the breast is blocked and the breath is tight. See the lightning and the thunderclap after the darkness. In the heart of man, nothing is strange. I think as you do. I put myself in your place, and everything is clear, even to a blind man, as clear as this hand itself. The man brought his hand up to cover his face. Sakagami could see in the dim light that the other two were nodding deeply, as if on a signal. You are fortune tellers, are you? I was in a hurry, and perhaps I was rude. Sakagami heaved a sigh. She left home barefoot. It is some distance from here, but she is waiting in the woods alone. She cannot move until I come. I had a telephone call from her just now, so short that it was no more than a signal, and I hardly know what I am about. Can I help going? Do you say I shouldn't go? I thought as much. No, you were right to admit everything like a man. It will be sad for both of you, but how very dangerous. The man clutched his staff to his chest with both hands and stood in silence for a moment. I shall ask you a question. Along this bank where we are gathered, there is a row of gas lights. How many of them are lighted, and how many are dark? Tell me, please. Tell me. He nodded as he spoke, and his head fell to his chest. Sakagami followed the line from the bottom of the hill behind the three. It was not the first time he had taken this road. Below the cliff, on one side, the gas lights stood at the intervals of about 2 yards, out up by a nearby movie theater, were for the safety of passers-by. The lamps were white and cold as frost needles. The glass chambers, like windows in the face of the cliff, were dark as far as his eye reached. They drank at the mist and sucked it in, and at intervals spewed out an ashen breath. Like a devil's death mask shaped from cotton wadding, the mist clung to the nearest lamp and became a great earth spider, sending out horrible threads on that ashen breath, into the sky and down to the ground. Was that why the mist seemed to clutch so at the face? They will all be out, the man said as Sakagami looked up and down the row. They are all out. The darkness of the night closed in more tightly. They will all be out. And now you will see that one lamp up the hill from here is still burning. You see it? How many lamps away is it? I see it. There was one feeble, wavering flame, about to float off on the mist, but I can't tell you how many lamps away it is. Not far away. When the traveler sees a night crane in the pines along a lonely road, it is always in the 5th pine away. The lamp will be the 5th up the hill from you. If I am wrong, that gentleman will tell me so. He says nothing. I am right. Count them for yourself. Count them for yourself. 1. He tapped twice with his staff. 1. 2. Tap, tap, tap. 3. 4. 5. It is the 5th, as I said. But why? You see us, and this bank, and these dark lamps, all because of that one light. But for it you would not see me if I were to pinch your nose. He did indeed see the dim figures by the light of that one lamp. By that faint light, even the By that faint light, even the row of dark lamps down the slope sent out an occasional flicker of light, and Sakagami stood dim and uncertain in the breathing mist. What does it mean? And can you see nothing under the 5th lamp, the lamp that is burning? I beg your pardon? Sakagami's voice shook. And can you see nothing? Nothing. Nothing? Not a thing. That is not as it should be. You will but go up and look, you will see. It is for that I have stopped you. Listen, if you will. He twisted and bent forward a little, and rattled his staff in the stones that lay at the base of a gas lamp. The sound was drunk up in the mist. Let me make the point clear. The gas light under which we stand, it has moved not one step ahead of us, and not one step behind us since I stopped you, is the 19th in the row from the bottom of the hill. If I am wrong, the master there will correct me. 3 years ago, on a different night indeed, but in this same November, at this same hour, this happened to me too. I was not then the blind man you see now. He turned squarely toward Sakagami, but his head was still bowed. I was going to meet a woman as you are, and I was climbing this hill, but I passed only one blind man. That is the whole of the difference. Kay, Longhead faced squarely down the hill away from Sakagami and started to walk off, and was still again. And the woman, still sitting on her heels, she turned to hear the story. The knee of her kimono and the obi at her waist were folded one against the other. Her throat was white. The man's voice was firm. He called me from behind, as I called you, and at the 19th lamp, the 5th below the lighted lamp, he said to me what I have said to you. I have but repeated it. And why should I not go to meet the woman? I retorted as you did. He answered. Sakagami somehow knew that he was Longhead here. There is a strange creature under the 5th lamp ahead, the lamp that is still lighted. a demon that takes the shadows of men, snatches them, devours them. He sucks at a shadow, and the man grows thin, licks the shadow with his tongue, and the man languishes, tramps on the shadow, and the man is ill, snuffs it quite away, and the man dies. The demon is always about in the sunlight and the moonlight, to suck, to lick, to trample, and in time the man dies. Terrible though that is, it is more terrible when, under just such a light as we have here, he opens his mouth, the blind man's gaping mouth, and swallows the shadow. That is all. The man dies. You are not to pass by here again. That is what he said. But I was young and hot-headed. What was he talking about? I retorted. In the first place, what sort of monster was it? He did not smile. Very well, I shall tell you. It is like a lizard with a fez. It is like a white dog spread-eagled, and on its head a beretta. Seeing was quicker than hearing, I said. Let the thing have my shadow. I had believed nothing. I climbed to that fifth light, kicking up the gravel as I went. I found nothing there. The blind man, scraping at the gravel with his staff, sprang up the hill after me. Have you gone mad? You are too brave for your own good. It is no use talking to one who believes nothing I say. The demon will not be after your shadow for a time. He has long been after the shadow of the woman you are going to meet. I tell her through you to be forever careful, not for a moment to be off her guard. That is what he said. And why should he be giving advice? Did he know the woman? I asked. A housewife in my block saw her just this evening. They were at the bath together. Skin like snow, padded and rounded. One wondered why it did not melt in the stream. Over it, scarlet satin and pale yellow sash, scarlet that seemed to glide and flow from the breasts. A kimono for good autumn weather, a lattice work of indigo and dark blue stripes, a black damask obi and a scarlet cord, an azure ribbon to bind the hair, an ear faint through hair aglow like falling dew, and the rich swell of the neck and shoulders. Woman though she was, the housewife I speak of stood fascinated. She moved around to the front and stared at the back, and peered at the naked form in the mirror, and she described everything to me, down to the mole on the white skin at the base of the left breast. It will be this woman you are going to see. That is what he said. Sakagami was trembling, not only because the faint image of the woman, now looking away, came to him as that of the woman being described, the same kimono, the same obi, but because of the woman he was going to meet tonight. He expected her to have on that obi and that kimono, but what if she should have on the everyday black obi and the latticed kimono that had so become a part of his life? His blood ran cold, and an instant later he flushed. Am I right? The kimono, the obi, the scarlet beneath? Am I right about the woman you are going to meet? It made no difference about the blue damask, or about the indigo and blue, or about the white skin. But imagine, if you will, how it was to be told, even of the mole on the breast. It was as though I could see before my eyes, fearsome thing, the figure lying naked, the kimono open, here in this Yotsuya valley. The demon, said the blind man, was after the woman, to lick her shadow, to suck at it, to trample it, to devour it. Tell her, if you please, that she is to be careful. But I was not listening. I flew off in a dark cloud. I was not to be stopped by iron gate or stone door, and I went to meet that small, defenseless woman. I had seen a demon that would take her shadow, would suck at her shadow, would lick at her shadow, and I had seen it in the light of the gas lamp. The woman's house was very near here. It will be after you day and night. You are not looking well. Your shadow is thin already. Watch for it. That, sir, is what I said. An unhappy woman whom labor and anguish had already so devastated that her obi, however tightly bound, could not be tight enough. Into the head of this unhappy woman I drove my words as with a hammer. In my anger that she had shown herself naked to another, she fell upon my knee and in a voice that trembled, asked whom I had met and what I had heard along the way. Look to your own conscience, I said, and I did not tell her I had heard the story from a blind man. A tragic mistake. It was the blind man himself who clung to the woman like her very shadow. It was the blind man himself who might have been taken for a lizard in the gaslight, who hovered about the back fence, the well, the hedge, face livid, eyes red, lips pale and tight, waiting for the woman to come in or go out. Had she known it was the blind man, she would not have been so haunted by the story. Thereafter I saw the woman less often. She seemed to avoid me. I thought of killing her and myself, but presently as I heard the details, I learned that she was avoiding everyone. She had a strange longing to be hidden. And finally, like the split-tailed cat who has taken the shape of a beautiful woman, she came to hate the light of the sun. Whether it was night or day, she closed the doors and the shutters and lay hidden behind 2 and 3 screens. I forced my way through and saw her. Her very kimono seemed smoldering and musty, and she only knelt looking at the floor, so slight and wraith-like that it seemed she must quite disappear. I raised her face. The eyes were destroyed. I beg your pardon. No, the woman's eyes, both the woman's eyes. I heard her story. She had not been able even for an instant to take her eyes from her shadow. If she went into the kitchen, it was on the window. If she went to the veranda, it was on the doorstep or behind her on the door, the wall, the screen. And wherever the shadow was, there was the demon, to suck at it, to lick, trample, rub, embrace, cover. In the light of the moon, the light of the sun, the light of the lamp, the faint light of the snow or of trees in blossom, there was always that shadow. And with the shadow, discomfort, revulsion, terror, and loathing. Finally, darkness. But even when she could not see the palm of her own hand, there was the shadow. When all the lights were out, in the alcove, on the lintel, on the ceiling, on the door frame, the floor, now here and now there, the shape of a lizard with something slapped down on its head, weirdly white, the body long, the legs writhing, now clinging, now curling into a ball, now crawling along, stretched out its full length. She would scream when she saw it, and it would flit away. How quickly! But a moment later it would come creeping back again. She tried desperately not to see it, but she saw because she had eyes. Lying back on her pillow, her hair pulled tightly back, she dropped medicine into her eyes and was blind. Darkness over the heart, too. I took her hand, and for the first time told her that I had heard the story of the demon who eats shadows from a certain blind man halfway up the hill. I told her how old he seemed to be and described his appearance, and the woman gasped as though her eyes had suddenly been opened and began weeping bitterly. Frustrated in love, the blind man had put his curse on her. I clutched at the flesh of my face and wept tears of anger, chagrin, vexation, and finally of pity. I determined that I would be with her, and with this hand I drove a needle into both my eyes. A bond from one life lasts through 3. Enlightenment has come to us, and penitence, and release from the appetites of the world. We take our staffs, that blind man, with us, and ashamed of the daylight, go out into the night. We have met you along the way. I have troubled you, but as our sleeves brushed in the mist, I knew, and I spoke to you. It is for you to take my advice or throw it away. I have nothing more to say. If you will, I shall leave you. Forlorn and graceful, the woman rose to her feet. Her weeping had sounded below the narrative. Led by Longhead, the 3 of them groped their way down the hill. 3 staffs, 3 phantoms in the fading gaslight. The bit of silk pressed to the eyes by that white hand, as the woman had arisen, seemed to linger on. Scarlet butterfly cutting its way in and out of the mist. Ooh, that was good. I enjoyed that. The punctuation and the yeah, this text isn't a very good one. I found that out in the last one. Um, there's spelling errors and missing words and stuff, so it didn't help with following it. But that was really interesting, and I really enjoyed that. I'm not quite sure what to think of it now. I was thinking it was going to go somewhere like a one of those time things where Sakagami was actually one of the blind men, sort of thing, and it was just going to be a cycle. But yeah, I guess I'm not sure what quite to think about it, and I'm not sure. I don't know if it's one of those things where it's not supposed, because the author was surrealist, so it might not have to be fully logical and continuing. Yeah, but that was fun. I'm glad that I was able to read that one too, because that was kind of more of what I was hoping for and expecting in this Spooktober. So yeah, that was fun. I quite enjoyed that. And I'm going to have to end really quickly now. That was so first it was Whistle and I Will Come to You, My Lad by MJ something or other. I should probably find it. By M.R. James, and this was A Tale of the Three Who Were Blind by Izumi Kyoka. Japanese Edgar Allan Poe. Yes, that was spooky birthday stream with I enjoyed the first one too. Um but I was looking surreal twisted with the second one. So I did. I got that and I got just a kind of a fun story to begin with. So yeah, that was that. And thanks for watching. I won't be back for a while. But yes, thanks for watching. Whoever found their way here, got lost, and did so. Um, yeah, yeah, it will. It'll be a while. Just because, yeah, I don't have the opportunities that I used to. Um, but I will at some point. I will be back eventually. Just once things get figured out. Yeah. So yes, thanks for watching. It's been fun. It's good to chat with you again. And yeah, see you at some point next time. Okay, so bye and have a happy October and Halloween and all that stuff. So, yes, bye. And I'm looking at the wrong thing. My setup's messed up too. So, yes, thank you. And yeah, so bye.